Excellent. So without further ado, I want to call on Dr. Biro to come and highlight, enlighten us. Thank you.
Bushu Nidinwe Maganidok, Nich Nishnabeg, Nich Marzik, Bungietagon Ninita Nishnabem, Giganos Indishnakas, Neashi Winigaming and Donjaba, Nigigan Doden. I've just introduced myself in Anishinaabemun, or Ojibwe or Chippewa, which is a language from the central part of this country, Algonquian. And I said my name is Giganos, and that's my third great-grandfather's name. And Nigig is my clan, or my totem, which is the otter. And I'm from Neashi Winigaming, which is the Cape Croker Indian Reserve, about 3 hours north of Toronto, 4 hours north of Detroit, on the Saugeen or the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario. Tonight I want to talk about this theme of reconciliation by bringing out someone's experiences who embodied the messages of truth and reconciliation, which is my grandfather. My grandfather was a bush Indian. He grew up on the reserve and beyond the reserve in that beautiful part of Georgian Bay where the Niagara Escarpment dips into those blue and turquoise waters. When I was a young boy, he lived in the forest for years on end. And about every 6 weeks, he would walk out of the woods to pick up tins of coffee for his morning drink. I can remember what he wore, which was dark blue or green work pants. And I don't think I ever remember seeing him without a red and black plaid shirt. His feet were warmed by gray woolen socks with white heels and toes, and there was a single red stripe on those socks above his ankles. Now, when Grandpa was a young man, he qualified to be a tradesman. He plastered the walls of farms and village homes throughout rural Ontario. He also worked as a rum runner during the Prohibition era, ferrying spirits back and forth between Windsor and Detroit. In the mid-1920s, he became a Hollywood Indian at the end of the silent film era. So what did he do? He got shot and fell off horses for a living. He worked in LA throughout the 1930s, and then when Pearl Harbor was bombed, he returned back to the reserve in Ontario. There he planted seeds and followed horses before his farming life came to an end when his house burned to the ground. My mother was about 5 years old at the time. He soon developed tuberculosis, and then he spent 10 years in a Detroit sanitarium, leaving the reserve again when my mom was a very young girl. And when he left, she missed her dad like life itself. Now, Grandpa Josh was one of the smartest men that I knew. He also had an eye for the absurd and could be purposely foolish. He was a true trickster. In family pictures we have of him, he's posed with his pants down around his ankles. His quick wit could diffuse many tense situations. Once when he was in a Wyerton bar, at a time when the Indian Act made it illegal for Indians to drink, a local man, offended by his presence, wanted to pick a fight. This man rose threateningly, and he glowered at my grandfather, and he said, "Are you Joshua from the Bible who made the sun stand still?" Grandpa looked him in the eye and paused for effect, and in his sing-song voice said, "No, I'm Joshua from the reserve who made the moon shine still." His play on words and his subtle invitation to come and join got him out of a tight spot that day. His humor rescued him on many challenging occasions. And Grandpa needed that humor. He had been sexually abused by a minister on the reserve when he was a young boy. And I believe this made him both restless and sad. These demons plagued him throughout his days, and Grandpa Josh became an alcoholic. One of the earliest stories I know of him is him having stolen the rector's sacramental wine and drinking it in the bush with his brothers. Racism and oppression were never far from his door during his 77 years on the earth. He did not often have the luxury of living up to his considerable intelligence. People say he was exceptionally eloquent in both Ojibwe and English. An elder of mine, Basil Johnson, told me that my grandpa was the best speaker of Anishinaabemowin that he ever met. He said living pictures were painted with our verbs, and the world came alive under his tongue, and the trees would speak, and the sky would communicate whenever he would wax philosophical. Because Grandpa Josh was a philosopher at heart. It's true, he embodied the trickster as most Anishinaabe philosophers do, but his love for deep thought and dialogue truly made him tick. He drew on his experiences and he studied the stories of our lore with their layered wisdom. In this regard, he embodied many diverse life ways. Now, people at home will all remember him differently, and maybe that's a part of his brilliance. To me, he stressed the life of the mind. Probably heard what I wanted to hear, as many of us do when dealing with others, but my selective hearing recalls him saying that nothing was more important than the mind's active engagement with life's broader purposes. When he was in the sanitarium, and he only received about a grade 7 education, he read Kant and Nietzsche and Plato. He loved the ancient Greeks. I can still remember him speaking Socrates' words to me as a young teenager. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." In my first year of university, taking my introduction to philosophy class, I heard a professor repeat a phrase that I thought my grandpa had coined. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig is of a different opinion, it is only because they only know their own side of the question. My grandpa would talk about that all the time. I thought he invented it. While we never shared as much time together as I would have liked, Grandpa Josh urged us to think more deeply. I didn't know he was quoting John Stuart Mill in our conversations. Grandpa believed wisdom opens the door to experimentation with different points of view. He helped me to hypothetically inhabit other states of being through contemplating different points of view. Grandpa told me there were higher and better ways of living, and failure to consider, discuss, and engage with others on an intellectual level diminishes and undermines our potential. So, I found myself reading Socrates and Plato as a 13-year-old because of his influence. I didn't understand much of what I read, and I still don't, but I felt closer to him because when I did this, I knew I was following his encouragement to me. He repeatedly told my mother that we were relearning what we knew before we came to this earth, and that it was our responsibility to recover what had been forgotten and to live in accordance with those teachings. Thus, in my mind's eye, I recall sitting around the kitchen table with him and him waxing eloquent with a group. It was perhaps his favorite pastime. Maybe the most memorable thing he ever said to me is that life is at its best when it's like a university seminar. Now, I received the impression that there was no better way to spend your time, though I've since nuanced that view. I still treasure the gist of his idea, and maybe that's why I'm a teacher today. I probably didn't know what a university was at the time Grandpa Josh said this to me. He certainly never had the privilege of formal attendance at any institution of higher learning himself, and no one in my family had ever gone to university before, though it's rumored he received an honorary doctorate from the University of Kentucky because of what he knew about plants. So thinking back through the years, which ultimately are clouded and shadowy, I believe that his main message to me was the life of the mind is one of the greatest gifts. I'm pretty sure he wanted me to pass along his enthusiasm for learning. So while I remember his humor, his love, and his foolishness, when I pause and think more deeply about his influence, I remember his counsel to read, be still, and listen to other people's points of view. Grandpa Josh repeatedly told us, get all the education that you can. You can always carry it with you, and no one can steal it from you. This was spoken by a man who traveled the continent, and he knew too much about stealing. He was robbed of his innocence as a young man. His relatives were repeatedly whisked away to residential school. Our traditional lands were in other people's hands due to the government's failure to honor our treaties. These treaties, agreements ratified by his grandfather's own hand. He put his little otter marking on that document. We were fleeced. We could barely take the deer, bear, geese, duck, fish, berries, and other resources which sustained us for generations because Canadian law prevented us from accessing what was rightly ours under those agreements. But despite these injustices, Grandpa Josh's message to me was to learn about others' points of view. Immanuel Kant, understand Descartes, read Rousseau, master John Maynard Keyes' work. I was left with a distinct impression that I should study, and never stop studying and talking with others about the things that I learned. Somehow, as Grandpa Josh sat at our farm's kitchen table, he persuaded me that few things were more important than honestly engaging with others through their ideas. Of course, he spoke about our Weendigok, our Memengwesiwak, our Nanabojo. He talked about our traditional stories. He sang, he danced our stories. He told crazy stories about his own adventures. He marveled at the geology, biology, and physics of the world. But in my own mind, at least, it was the study of philosophy or the meaning of life broadly construed that he most strongly stressed. I don't think he regarded other subjects as being less important. It's just that I've understood that he was urging me to organize other bodies of ideas by a broader set of principles. And so I've spent my life trying to do this, not often consciously, of course. And sometimes I wonder about what those principles might look like. I do, though, treasure his focus and expectation that we should not sit comfortably with what we think we know. I'm a 6th generation Christian. My great-great-great-grandfather received the Methodist missionaries in the 1820s. And so we've had that influence on our life for many, many years. I myself am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and have participated in that faith since I was 18 years of age. I was able to serve a mission as a young man, and through my life have maintained an attendance in a congregation and have actively participated in that faith. And I love it. But one of the things I love is then visiting other churches and other sites of worship. And so you'll find me around Victoria in different congregations, just sneaking in the back and sitting and listening to the beauty of the many faith traditions that we find in our midst. And I invariably come away uplifted and strengthened from that experience. And when I have an occasion to be able to talk to others from those congregations about what motivates them and inspires them, I also feel uplifted. In our church, we teach that everyone should keep all the good that they have and then add to it. And I'm grateful to be in a space and in spaces in my life that encourage that way of engaging. Because there's always room for further investigation, interrogation, and discussion. And this pattern motivates my life's approach and work. But I also know that, like my grandfather, I'm also foolish. While I don't deliberately try to draw attention to my absurdity, as he sometimes did, I know what I write and teach often serves that same purpose. I feel like I'm so partial in what I've been able to receive, and try as I might, I know there's much more beyond the horizons that I've discovered. To be philosophical is to admit our weaknesses, our partialities. I'm grateful Grandpa Josh made this quest as being Anishinaabe, being indigenous to that part of the world. I'm thankful for the beauty that surrounds us, that motivates me to engage in that search. A day like today, with the blue skies and the crisp air and the just sound of the season around us, is something that I am so grateful for, to be alive in this moment. So I hope in reflecting on Grandpa Josh, there's a little bit of this theme of truth and reconciliation and the methodology that he tried to embody, which we've been encouraged to take up by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in their 94 calls to action, which is an invitation to engage with one another across our differences, recognize the flaws and the challenges that we've experienced and that are continually a part of our lives, but also to find the beauty that is in our world and look for ways to sustain that. So I'm grateful for this invitation to speak with you this evening about this topic, and I look forward to the discussions that we'll have as we're together this evening. Miigwech Gazinduig Mityu Ahau. Thank you.
John.